In this second video exploring the history of comics, their creators, and their impacts on culture, we move ahead in the timeline from proto-superhero comic strip Flash Gordon and his creator Alex Raymond to the very first official superhero. While technically the Phantom is generally granted the title of the first superhero, and Doc Savage was the first to have abilities beyond that of normal human, the last son of Krypton, the Man of Steel, the Big Blue Boy Scout, Superman was the most recognizable and therefore the most marketable. He was the distillation of what a superhero could be, with his signature costume, red cape, and incredible set of powers. Superman is the purest embodiment of the male power fantasy, the progenitor of every costumed adventurer and vigilante to come after him. He's the Beatles of superhero comics, the archetype on which so many, just countless characters would be built. Superman is the Big Bang of superhero comics, and like the Big Bang set the universe into perpetual motion, Superman's influence has continued expanding, bringing life to just so many other characters. He's inspired generations of people and touched the lives and the imaginations of just hundreds of millions of people across the globe and across nearly a century. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created perhaps the most recognizable fictional character ever. Superman would go on to achieve unparalleled success, save for a few of his peers like Batman. Throughout the 20th century and so far in the 21st century, Superman has garnered 100% brand recognition. He's become synonymous with the concept of the superhero, and he's racked up billions of dollars in profit across comics, movies, television, video games, radio, merchandise, theme parks, and just everything you can think of. Superman's publisher, DC Comics, was built on the success of the Man of Steel. Batman was only possible thanks to Superman's success. It's not hyperbole to say that Superman is one of the most influential, profitable characters ever created in any medium. Yes, Superman is that influential and that profitable. And as we all know, in the United States of America, success is rewarded, right? Well, join me in shock and disgust whenever I tell you, Siegel and Shuster died virtually penniless, having been tossed away by DC Comics, their names nearly erased from history. As we explore the themes of the very first Superman comic books, we'll try to answer these questions. What is the truth of the creator's tragic outcomes? Is there any justice for the poor and working class? Or are Siegel and Shuster's fates simply the American way?
Soon as you're born, they make you feel small by giving you no time instead of it all. Till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be.
Look up in the sky. Is it a bird? A plane? Nope, it's a subscribe button. Go ahead and hit that, please. Jerry Siegel was born on October 17, 1914, in Cleveland, Ohio, to Jewish parents who had immigrated to New York in 1900. They had fled Lithuania amid rising anti-Semitism, with his father opening a clothing store in Cleveland to support his wife and 6 children. Siegel's family moved to the Jewish neighborhood of Glenville, Ohio in 1928, where young Jerome attended high school. When he was 16, Jerry met another shy kid with glasses named Joseph Shuster. Siegel once recounted their early friendship, saying, "When Joe and I first met, it was like the right chemicals coming together." The two awkward boys bonded over a passion for science fiction, adventure fiction, and movies. Joseph Shuster was born in Toronto to a Jewish family on July 10, 1914. His father was also a tailor, operating a shop in the Toronto garment district. Shuster's father Julius had immigrated from Holland, and his mother Ida from Ukraine. As a kid, Shuster worked as a newspaper boy for the Toronto Daily Star. His family barely scraped by to keep food on the table. Unable to afford paper for his drawing practice, the aspiring young artist would scrounge for scraps of random paper that he could draw on. Shuster recalled in 1992, "I would go from store to store in Toronto and pick up whatever they threw out. One day I was lucky enough to find a bunch of wallpaper rolls that were unused and left over from some job. The backs were blank, naturally. So it was a gold mine for me, and I went home with every roll I could carry. I kept using that wallpaper for a long time." The duo began selling comic book stories to National Allied Publications in 1935. National Allied would, within a few years, become better known as DC Comics. Their first published comic book work came in New Fun number 6, dated October 1935. New Fun was the first comic book series composed only of original material. It's hard to imagine, but other comic books at the time were just reprinted newspaper comic strips like Flash Gordon, for example. If you'd like to learn more about Flash Gordon and his impact on comic books, there'll be a link below and up in the corner. Siegel and Shuster's first published stories were of a musketeer swashbuckler called Henry Duval and a supernatural crime fighter strip centered around Dr. Occult. Shuster recalled in 1992, "One was drawn on brown wrapping paper and the other was drawn on the back of wallpaper from Toronto, and DC approved them, just like that. It's incredible, but DC did say, 'We like your ideas, we like your scripts, and we like your drawings. But please, copy the stories in pen and ink on good paper.' So I got my mother and father to lend me the money to go out and buy some decent paper. The first drawing paper that I'd ever had, in order to submit these stories properly to DC Comics." Siegel and Shuster had been developing the Superman story and character since 1933. Hoping to sell it as a syndicated newspaper comic strip, much like Flash Gordon. However, the original incarnation of the character was not recognizable as the last son of Krypton that we all know now. The Superman was conceived as a bald telepathic villain with the goal of world domination and featured in The Reign of the Superman. As superfans will notice, that title was repurposed as an homage decades later for the quartet of new Supermen who emerged after the infamous Death of Superman story. Siegel and Shuster pitched their creation to Consolidated Book Publishing. The men received an encouraging letter, but Consolidated stopped publishing comic books very soon after. Shuster was hurt by the rejection nonetheless. Accounts vary and conflict, with some saying Shuster burned the pages, with the cover surviving only because Siegel salvaged it from the flames, or it was just torn to shreds, with only 2 cover sketches remaining. Either way, it's very clear that this was a formative moment for Joe and Jerry. They challenged themselves to adapt and overcome, as working class people have to do every day. It's reasonable to assume that this rejection played a psychological role in the formation of what Superman became. The one we all know and love, represented by his durability, stoicism, and perseverance. Eventually, Siegel reused that name, the Superman, for a new character that would become the most famous superhero of all time. Shuster modeled the hero on Douglas Fairbanks Sr., and modeled his bespectacled alter ego, Clark Kent, on a combination of Harold Lloyd and Shuster himself. The name Clark Kent was derived from movie stars Clark Gable and Kent Taylor. Much in the same way that The Facebook was rebranded as Facebook by real-life Lex Luthor Mark Zuckerberg, the creators dropped the article "The," gifting the world with one of its most enduring, powerful character monikers. Lois Lane, who would be established as a potential love interest in the first issue, was modeled on Joanne Carter, a model hired by Shuster. Joanne Carter would later marry co-creator Jerry Siegel in 1948. With a concept that they hoped could become a hit, and after 6 years fruitlessly soliciting the syndicates, Siegel and Shuster finally secured a deal to publish Superman in a comic book. In March of 1938, they sold the rights to Superman to the comic book publisher Detective Comics Inc., another forerunner of DC, for $130, around $2,400 when adjusted for inflation. This deal also contained a commitment by the pair to supply the publisher with new Superman material. Much like Jack Kirby and just dozens of other creators during these early years of the comic book industry, Siegel and Shuster couldn't have possibly conceived of the actual success that their creation would go on to achieve. Try to put yourself in their shoes. To sell this idea that you've grown and nurtured from, just a seed of an idea, and you've refined it and turned it into something that you really believe in. And you've had so many doors shut in your face that whenever you finally reach someone that's willing to, give you scraps for your idea, you sell it. You need a win. You need that validation. It probably looked like this was their last chance, and very likely it was. They had no way to conceive of the theme parks and the video games and the blockbuster films that Superman would go on to be in. They couldn't possibly have known how big Superman would get. That $130 wasn't a windfall by any means. It was rent and food money for a couple of working-class sons of immigrants, simply trying to make ends meet using this creation of theirs. Crafted with passion, refined over time with relentless dedication, and marketed to nearly every possible avenue of publication. But the basic need for survival in our capitalist society gave them no choice but to relinquish all rights to Superman. Until 1938 and the arrival of Superman, most comic books were simply reprinted comic strips found in nearly every newspaper. Publishers simply couldn't afford the rights to print new stories with any established popular characters. This created a vacuum in the burgeoning industry in which a paradigm shift was sorely needed. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster filled that void and propelled the comic book format and popular fiction into the stratosphere. Action Comics #1 was the genesis of what eventually came to be known as the Golden Age of comic books, an ironic title considering what we'll learn in a moment. The word Superman had been coined originally by philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, translated from the German word Übermensch. The English translation was popularized by Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw in his play Man and Superman, and this familiarized audiences with the concept and set the stage for the hero who would set the mold. Looking at the first issues of Superman comics, we see that Superman wasn't even the star of Action Comics for the first several issues. He was but one feature of various stories, but quickly interest in this alien immigrant grew to a point that he could no longer be sidelined. About a year after his debut in Action Comics, Superman was made the star of his own book, and the world would be changed forever. The art within these initial books could be seen as crude and unrefined at first glance. But as Jim Steranko, legendary comic book artist and historian, has said,
by today's standards, Joe Shuster's art is primitive. But what it lacks in sophistication and pretension, it makes up for in raw, energetic imagery.
Shuster had been formally educated in illustration with a scholarship to the Cleveland School of Art. But keep in mind that there was no standard established for superheroes yet, and Joe took his inspiration from humor and adventure books that were the style at the time. Superman's powers were almost unrecognizable from what we all know now. He couldn't withstand a nuclear blast, for example. In fact, at the time, he could be wounded by large enough munitions. He couldn't see through walls. He couldn't fly to the ends of the universe. Superman couldn't fly at all, but merely leap 1/8 of a mile at a time. Superman's heroic priorities in those initial comics in the late 1930s was an expression of Siegel and Shuster's life experiences till that point. His very first story in Action Comics was titled Superman, Champion of the Oppressed, with an exclamation point declaring his arrival. And the vast majority of these earliest stories were centered around working class and poor people, common scenarios that still exist today. Other early titles clearly stated the purpose for Superman's heroism, such as Superman in the Slums, in which he learns of juveniles in trouble for petty crimes that they committed at the command of a slumlord. Superman set his sights on the slumlord who's been exploiting the kids, keeping in mind that Superman's power was but a fraction of what we know it to be today. He beat the slumlord into submission and ordered him out of town. Then, Superman swoops in to rescue the boys themselves, just as the cops were hauling them to jail. In another encounter with the flawed justice system, Superman intentionally goes to prison to investigate shocking abuse being perpetrated by the prison superintendent. Prisoners are whipped and beaten, all while breaking rocks in the hot sun. Superman fought the law, and Superman won. Beating the hell out of wife abusers, ending the machinations of con artists, trouncing construction scammers, breaking up racketeering rings, and weeding out corruption from a trade union. These were the early priorities for Superman, and therefore important themes to Siegel and Shuster themselves. The original run of Superman certainly featured action and adventure, but the core of many stories were the victims of corrupt systems and exploitative hierarchies. Siegel and Shuster's status as children of Jewish immigrants influenced their work. They crafted an immigrant figure whose desire was to fit into American culture as an American. Siegel and Shuster later regretted their decision to sell Superman after he became an astonishing success. DC Comics now owned the character and reaped all the royalties. Nevertheless, DC Comics retained Siegel and Shuster as the principal writer and artist for the Superman comics, paying them a living wage. But when contrasted with the total profit Superman would ultimately yield, that amount is paltry. And we'll discuss that in a few moments. DC Comics had published a story featuring a younger version of Superman called Superboy, which was based on a story that Siegel had submitted to DC, but DC Comics had not paid for the story. And because DC had not paid for the copyright, Siegel sued them. Another valid complaint that the two had with DC was that they had cheated them out of royalties from the Superman radio show and all the merchandise. So, at the same time, they sued for the rights to Superman as well. The result of the lawsuit saw Siegel and Shuster agree to relinquish the copyrights of both Superman and Superboy in exchange for a settlement of just over $94,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $1 million in today's money. After paying his court fees, Jerry Siegel was left with about $29,000. Siegel was conscripted into the United States Army on June 28, 1943. He was trained as an airline engine mechanic, a film editor, a motion picture cutter, public relations man, a motion picture writer, and a reporter. He was posted in Honolulu, where he was given a writing job at the military newspaper Stars and Stripes. He focused mainly on comedy columns. Siegel was discharged on January 21, 1946, at the rank of Technician 4th grade. After the war, Siegel moved to New York. He attended the 1940 Chi-Con, the second World Science Fiction Convention, and he appeared in the convention's masquerade as Clark Kent. That's right. Superman's co-creator cosplayed as Superman's alter ego, making him one of, if not the first ever, to do so. During the span of their contract with DC, between 1937 and 1947, Siegel and his friend Shuster had together earned more than $400,000 working for the publisher. Siegel returned to DC Comics in 1959 at the prompting of his second wife. Although he did write some Superman stories, he no longer had any creative control, but instead answered to the direction of his editor. He wrote quite a lot of the super team Legion of Superheroes. Joe Shuster filed another lawsuit against DC for royalties for Superman, but ultimately was defeated by DC's corporate legal team. By 1959, Joe Shuster and his family were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Great Neck, Long Island, and struggling to pay their bills. Jerry Siegel first worked for Marvel in 1963 under the pseudonym Joe Carter. Alongside Stan Lee, he co-created the villain Plant Man. He also wrote the Human Torch story in Strange Tales number 112 and 113. Using his real name, Siegel penned a backup story starring X-Man Angel, which ran in Marvel Tales and Kazar. Jerry Siegel was down on his luck and in ill health at the time, according to then Marvel editor-in-chief Stan Lee, so he gave him a job at Marvel as a proofreader, during which time Siegel wrote the Angel story. Around a decade later, Joe Shuster was struggling to pay the bills as well, and with rapidly deteriorating eyesight, he was unable to secure drawing work, despite a number of ideas and a desire to work. Taking a job as a delivery man, Joe Shuster once delivered a package to the headquarters of his former employer, DC Comics. The workers at the time are said to have been embarrassed by this nearly blind old man, who in large part built the company for which they worked. The CEO of DC Comics called Joe into his office, handed him $100, and told him to get some new clothes and find a new job. Such disrespect and disregard for one of the co-creators of Superman. By 1976, Shuster was poor, legally blind, and living in a California nursing home. Meanwhile, Jerry Siegel became chronically ill with a cardiac disease, which once again sent him into dire financial times. After being let go from Marvel, he was unable to secure regular writing work. In 1975, upon hearing that Warner Brothers was producing a Superman film, Siegel called attention from the press to his medical condition, essentially shaming the company and its subsidiary DC Comics into a payout as a way to do damage control before their big movie was released. Warner Brothers agreed to give Siegel and Shuster a lifetime stipend of $20,000 a year, in exchange for never again contesting the ownership of the copyright to Superman. That amount was later increased to $30,000 a year. Decades ago, DC had stopped crediting the two men in Superman comics, effectively disconnecting the superhero from his creators in the public consciousness. This final deal between the creators and the publisher cemented Siegel and Shuster would always be credited for the Man of Steel. Without this often overlooked moment, it's easy to imagine that their names would have faded from history, as DC had no incentive to feature them as Superman's creators. Warner Brothers and DC won the optics game by silencing the creators with money they desperately needed to survive. Similarly to when they originally pitched the Man of Steel, the duo wasn't paid for the value of their labor or a fair share of enormous profits. Profits that simply wouldn't have existed without their creativity, hard work, and perseverance, all of which were built on their experiences as first-generation working-class Jewish Americans. Siegel and Shuster were given what amounts to hush money, so as not to disrupt the massive profits that Warner Brothers and DC would see when Superman made the world believe a man could fly. This may seem like a comfortable payment for their creation, but only until you learn that, as of 2017, the character of Superman had garnered just under $2 billion in profit. The executives at Warner Brothers and DC line their pockets with just astonishingly large bonuses and payments, despite box office bombs, legendarily awful video games. The Last Son of Krypton endures. DC and Warner Brothers will always be able to fall back on Superman, no matter how many times they artistically and financially step on a rake. Not because those companies are worthy of endless second chances, but because Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created a character that endures despite their corporate bungling. DC and Warner Brothers aren't too big to fail, but Superman will always return from the dead, carrying their corporate husks along with him. Jerry Siegel was awarded many accolades, such as a 1975 Inkpot, a Hugo Award in 1979, an Eisner in 1992, and he was inducted into the Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1993. He died on January 28, 1996, of a heart attack after suffering from cardiac disease for years. Posthumously, Siegel was given the Bill Finger Award for Excellence in Comic Book Writing in 2005. In 2009, a street in Ohio was renamed in his honor. Jerry Siegel remained married to his co-creator's original Lois Lane model, Joanne, until his death. Joe Shuster, too, was awarded many times within the comic book industry, receiving his own Eisner and Hugo prizes, as well as his rightful place in the Jack Kirby Hall of Fame. He died on July 30th, 1992, of congestive heart failure and hypertension.
At the beginning, Superman was very much a socialist superhero. He fought for the unemployed, the oppressed, he beat up wife beaters. It's about a man driven by a burning sense of injustice. There are no monsters or robots, he fights against corrupt council officials. He was conceived as a Depression-era superhero who dealt with the problems of ordinary people.
The canonical story of Superman is one that's well known and beloved by just countless people. But the real-life story of his creators, their hardships, their hard work, and their near erasure from history is one that I think we as a society should keep in mind. These early stories were rooted in doing the right thing for the common citizen, for the working class, not just fighting evil space gods and billionaires in batsuits. As terrific as those fantastical stories are, don't get me wrong, I love it. I love when Superman's fighting Darkseid and stuff, that's great. I think that he has strayed from his roots a little bit. There are still stories here and there that tap into those roots, such as Superman Smashes the Klan by Gene Luen Yang. But this story is out of canon, and stories like this are few and far between. Grant Morrison applied the original socialist angle to Superman during their run, bringing the hero back down to the streets, to a less godlike status. Tom Taylor's new series, Superman, Son of Kal-El, which places Clark's son John as the central character, only has one issue out as of this writing. But that issue was so strong and touched on the themes of this video so well that I delayed the video so I could add this section. In the book, John Kent is trying to find his own way as Superman, while maintaining the legacy that his father had established. The issue hints at John looking to these original themes as his approach to being a different Man of Steel. Rather than truth, justice, and the American way, John adopts the slogan, truth, justice, and for a better world. I'm anxious to see how John's path is carved. Maybe he can become the working class hero his dad once was. I don't believe that the cosmic epic battles need to be done away with entirely. I enjoy those too. I do think I'd be more drawn to Superman if they put more effort into reflecting those early humanist adventures, fighting corrupt systems and exploitative authoritarians. And I kind of suspect that it would resonate with a lot of people these days, as we increasingly see our power drained from us as if we're buried in kryptonite. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, first-generation working-class Americans, followed the instruction manual for the American dream to the letter. Hard work, perseverance, and loyalty to the industry that they chose and loved. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, or in this case, their iconic red booties. They never wavered or faltered in their goal, and they never expected a handout. But they deserved a much greater profit from their labor, considering their work was the foundation for DC Comics, and everything to come after. In the comics industry itself, this issue remains a prominent one. With the release of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, former Captain America scribe Ed Brubaker made waves by calling attention to the fact that, although he created the concept of the character Winter Soldier, Disney and Marvel have not awarded any royalties despite the just massive success the character has seen in live-action film and TV. This issue of creators not being paid commensurate to the success of their creations is one that extends outside the comic book industry and outside art. It affects all of us. As the cost of living continues to skyrocket, as executive payouts reach just farcical numbers, the common person, the working class, those of us who create the value of these products, we're left behind. There is no Superman who's going to save us from exploitation and alienation, from, the value of our labor. But if we can learn to value our own labor and see it not as, small expendable cogs in a giant machine, but as necessary components for the machine to exist in the first place, which it is, maybe, just maybe, we can save ourselves and one another.
A working class hero is something to be. 'Cause room at the top, they're telling you still.
Thanks for watching. I hope you'll subscribe and hit the like button, if you liked the video, and let people know that it's, something that they should check out. I really appreciate you giving me your time. Thank you.
If you wanna be like all the folks on the hill, a working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be. If you wanna be a hero, well, just follow me.